residents of Sarapi district, Chiang Mai province, have the highest rate of lung cancer in the country. Every year, for 2 to 3 months, Sarapi, Chiang Mai, and the entire northern region of Thailand, as well as large areas of Laos and Burma, suffocate under smoke. To contextualize this, let's look at the air quality index during the Canadian wildfires of 2023, which have a Wikipedia page, by the way. So air quality is measured by ppm, parts per million. Basically, it puts a number on the unwanted particles in the air. Anything over 50 ppm is considered unhealthy. At its worst, the pollution affecting cities like Chicago and Minneapolis during the wildfires were measured at 256 and 228 respectively. This lasted for around 2 days and made international headlines. Comparatively, a few years back, the city of Chiang Rai measured an index of over 300 for 9 consecutive weeks. There is no Wikipedia page. And this happens every year. This annual climate apocalypse is a relatively new phenomenon, beginning around 20 years ago and rapidly increasing in intensity. The cause, in my opinion, is a conspiracy. This conspiracy is a product of a decades-long interplay between state and capital, the birthing of mass agribusiness, monopolisation, vertical integration of markets, of coups, of massacres in the streets, and of networks of dark finance and patronage. This is what I call the corn conspiracy. Because in short, the toxic hell is caused really by the burning of agricultural byproduct. That is to say, clearing fields of agricultural waste with fire in order to plant for the next season's crops. The main offender, I will tell you up front now, being corn, or maize as it's also known. Something which has been obfuscated behind a smoke screen by the powers that facilitated it. The more research one reads into the topic, the more apparent the obfuscation becomes. Clear inaccuracies and contradictions in reporting appear time and time again. This is particularly egregious when one actually lives in the affected region. For example, in nearly every article I've seen, northern farmers burning sugarcane has been blamed for the smoke pollution in the north. However, I have never, nor has anyone I know, seen a sugarcane plant in the region. And I've been here for 10 years. And others were born here. They've never seen one. Eerie, no? The annual climate catastrophe traces its origins back to Siam's spell as a rice bowl for the region under the grip of the British Empire. They, and the successor empire of the United States, went on to develop Thailand's lands and its bourgeois class to ensure this extractive arrangement continued. The tentacles of market relations would eventually reach into the hills, tear down the forests, sow the corn, and set it alight. Today, when we look into the skies over the hills, we see a grey smog. Hiding behind the grey is a network of elite financiers, petty bourgeois intermediaries, and military strongmen. I talked about this in all of the past 3 seasons of this podcast. In many ways, this mini-series is a follow-up to our last episode on agricultural practices and counterinsurgency. In that series, we saw how agricultural practices developed in line with decades of counterinsurgency policies. We saw how mass agribusiness was birthed out of the global anti-communist restructuring of Asia during the supposed Cold War. In this mini-series, we're going to focus on one of the many outcomes of this development. In the agriculturally induced annual environmental catastrophe, which is the deadly smog season. I hope to answer a couple of key questions that I'm often asked, such as, how and why does this happen? And why can't anyone seem to do anything about it? So, let's take a deep breath of grey air and get into it. Hi, it is currently April 2024 in the north, in the hills, and the smoke is finally lifting after 2 months of suffocating, blanketing grey air. We weren't planning on making this series, and I was kind of reticent to, because to be honest, the whole subject is quite a bummer and really complicated as well. And oftentimes I feel like I'm just moaning when I complain about it. But if you'll bear with my moans, at least for the first part of this episode, I think we can learn quite a lot about mass agribusiness and generally the relationship between capital, the state, and the people, particularly peasants, through looking at the smoke. I also don't think this is going to be a very long series, maybe just 2 episodes. We're actually in the middle of writing a series about the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, so do hold on for that. For now though, as I said, it's April and the smoke is still here, though it is getting a little better. This year actually hasn't been as bad as the past few, and we'll get into why later. But there were some extremely rough days in the past few months where the grey air was so thick that the sun no longer cast a shadow. So I'm going to start by talking about what it's like in the smoke, which is pretty bleak. But do bear with me, it will get more interesting and instructive as we go on, because there is some light behind these smoggy clouds. So, what are we talking about when we talk about smoke? Well, just to state my credentials, I moved to these northern hills in 2014, so I've lived through more than a few seasons. So in late January, it's when the air starts to get a little hazy. Nothing too scary, but the mountains in the distance have a kind of white fade between you and them. By late February, the fade grows more intense. Oftentimes, it won't have rained for over a month, and the forest begins to dry out. Dry leaves begin to blanket the roadsides. The occasional wind whips up dust and debris. It's then that you'll likely see a few fields undergoing controlled burning, with balaclava-clad workers standing by. In England, this used to be called clearing the stubble. Not only fields, but I've also seen plenty of burning of just piles of leaf debris by the roadside, for example. March is when it gets really bad. You start to lose sight of the mountain. The temperature rises to the high 30 degrees. People start putting on masks. You start to notice your scratchy throat and stinging eyes. By April, it's hell. 40 degrees and the smoke is so thick you can look directly at the sun. On bad days, there are no shadows. It's a very eerie feeling to look at the weather app where it shows the sun on a blue sky background, but outside the sky is purely grey. Those who can afford it use air purifiers, which are these kind of machines that look like dehumidifiers, which cleans the air in the room. I sleep with one on, and when I leave the bedroom every morning, I can instantly smell the smoke inside of the house. You quickly get used to the smell though. I was talking to a friend in Kuala Lumpur this year who was just baffled that I couldn't actually ever really smell it. Last year I went to Bangkok for a week during the smoke season, and when I opened my suitcase, all of a sudden it hit me and it just reeked of smoke. So this is where we get into the different class-based experiences of the smoke. For me, I am solidly middle income, though I used to be way broker for the first few years I was here. And so for me today, the air purifiers are essential. They cost around 3,000 baht, that's about 75 euros. However, a lot of houses don't have much in the way of insulation, I live in a relatively modern house, and a couple of my windows are just like slats, that don't permanently close. And I plug them up annually. The less well-off have just grates that are incapable of closing entirely or being blocked off. So even if they could afford a purifier, it wouldn't be of much use. For the working class too, most work outside, all day, every day. The biggest sector for employment here is by far and away agriculture and agriculture-related industries. So like maybe truck drivers or sellers of farming equipment, repair people, that kind of stuff. And like I said, while I have the luxury of hiding inside, the agricultural workers are outside all day, every day. The same goes for masks. I spent about 400 baht on an N95 mask, which I wear outside. Poorer people wear those near useless blue masks, while those working outside all day, I notice, often don't bother wearing anything at all. And who can blame them? The effects of the smoke are cumulative. It gets worse as it goes on. After a month, you start getting migraines, nosebleeds, coughs. Last year, a panda at Chiang Mai Zoo was pictured with blood pouring from its nose. It died a few weeks later. As I said in the opening, Sarapi district has the highest rate of lung cancer in the country. That fact was reported a few weeks ago with very little additional information. But Sarapi is also one of the poorest districts in the Greater Chiang Mai area and makes up the city's industrial zone to the southeast, home to migrant workers from the countryside and from Burma. In the villages themselves, life is lived outdoors, both work and leisure, farming, eating, often sleeping even outdoors. Not that inside is any better in the typically wooden houses of the rural poor. As for the upper and the upper middle class, I'm not sure what exactly to call them, upper income people, they just leave. Maybe they go to Bangkok, which is usually where they're from, or they go to the south, to the coast, to the beaches, places like Hua Hin and Phuket. Certainly, almost all foreigners do this. The rest of us stay behind in the quiet streets. No one goes out much, and it can be oddly peaceful at times in the grey hell. So, why is it this bad, and how did it get this bad? To answer that question, I want to use a word that I think I've used before on the show, but maybe never explained, and that is latifundia. The word latifundia originally comes from the Roman Empire, referring to the agricultural plantations on the empire's periphery that were worked by slave labor in order to provide huge enough surpluses to feed the rest of the empire. The plantations would seek to expand their lands and increase their slave holdings, constantly seeking new fields and labor for a greater surplus. These latifundia were the proto-models of imperial governance and industrialized agriculture. Indeed, there is a direct chain, as the Spanish and the Portuguese even use the word latifundios to refer to their slave plantations in colonial Latin America. Today, the word is used typically by those in kind of third worldist, global south context to refer to places where intense industrialized agriculture takes place. The likes of the Brazilian cattle farms, the Moroccan fruit farms, the Kenyan tea plantations, and oftentimes the Southeast Asian rice paddies. One key facet of the modern-day latifundia is the vast surplus of agricultural product created. That is to say, far more agricultural produce than can be used in the local economy, as of course the produce is intended for export, like the Roman latifundia of old. The fact that this is export-driven agriculture is essential for understanding its insatiable appetite for expansion. In more traditional sustainable farming communities, only a small surplus was necessary to feed the local people. Hence, there was no need to drive expansion further. And this may sound antiquated, but these kind of localized economies of self-sufficiency still exist on a national scale. For example, in the UK milk industry, which is heavily regulated by the state, it produces just about the right amount of milk for the UK economy. As such, there is, relatively speaking, very little import or export of milk in the UK. It sounds a little strange, but the UK milk industry is a sustainable domestic agricultural economy. Similarly, somewhere like the UK is, of course, outside of the milk industry, the UK is the imperial core, to where the agricultural surplus of the latifundia flows. Having said that, latifundias are not simply poor places that do farming. There are plenty of places in the global south that would not meet the definition, such as Sierra Leone's fruit farms, or even Vietnam's coffee plantations. These economies are also plundered by the imperial core, but crucially, not particularly for a massive agricultural surplus, rather for other products, like iron ore in Sierra Leone, or sweatshop garments and factory workers in Vietnam. In many of these global south economies, agricultural products are generally self-sustained, like the milk industry in the UK. In short, it's more economically productive to grow food for the workers in other industries within the domestic economy than it is to use that economic capacity to create a massive surplus of food for export. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to go off my notes here. So my workers in the factories, in the sweatshops, in the mines can earn more money for my economy if they're doing that rather than growing massive amounts of surplus food. So in my agricultural sector, I'm going to use it to feed those workers in the factories and in the mines. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So there are even plenty of places in Europe that we could define as latifundia, such as the flatlands in the east of Romania or the greenhouses in southern Spain. So this definition of latifundia is by no means scientific. Oftentimes, it can be highly debatable. It's a consequence or a confluence of a series of political, economic, and geographic circumstances that allows a latifundia to develop, and this we will get into later. Again then, it is in the latifundias that the economic fixation on industrialized, export-driven mass agriculture creates this huge pressure for increasing surplus and increasingly expand fields. And finally then, we find ourselves back in the hills of northern Thailand. But not the paddy fields of the valley, but in the cleared forest, the corn plantations on the slopes of the hills. You know, it's interesting actually, when I first moved here in 2014, a lot of people tended to blame the smoke on mushroom foraging, which was absolutely bullshit. People claimed that, actually they would usually say, hill tribes burn the rice fields to encourage the growth of these certain mushrooms, which is almost 100% bullshit. There's a nugget of truth in that like these mushrooms do grow in burnt paddy fields, but my god, the hill people who live in the hills don't even grow rice, and that has nothing to do with the mass smog. Similarly, I've heard people blame sugarcane, wrong. Laotian farmers, wrong. Slash and burn farming, wrong. Rice fields in general, wrong. And even shabu restaurants, I remember the first year I moved here, I heard that. Also wrong. And I am going to bust many of these myths in more detail later. And of course, we cannot blame a commodity per se. It's not the commodity's fault. Neither can we, as reasonable people, blame those who produce or even consume that commodity. No. We have to blame the system that affords the smoke to come from that commodity. And we will in due time. But the commodity in question, as I've said before, is of course corn or maize. And here I'm just going to say I will be using the word corn to refer to both corn and maize, even though it's not strictly accurate, but both are responsible. And just for my own relief, I'll be saying corn. You don't need to worry about it. So, corn. Listeners to the show will know how I loathe it, though it is by no means corn's fault. And I do actually quite enjoy eating corn, particularly tam khao pot. But in short, yes, it's corn. Hence the corn conspiracy. And we'll be busting down some of the lies about those innocent mushrooms later. And though this conspiracy is disputed and refuted in some circles, I am highly confident, and I intend to show my workings. So first, let's take a look at corn. The plants are tall, nearly 2 meters, tightly wrapped with layered leaves and stems, and the kernels, the seeds themselves, are then attached to the cob. For corn, the kernels are the only thing you want. Those yellow or sometimes white and purple seeds. As such, harvesting creates a huge amount of organic waste for the return of usable product. Despite the waste, it is a relatively non-labor intensive crop compared to, say, rice. Corn seeds can be sown in the weak red highland soil, the dindang. There, they require little to no irrigation. Their annual rainy season, followed by winter and the dry season, provides the plant with the necessary conditions to produce a crop. Harvesting, too, is relatively easy. You wait for the dry season to wither the plants away, and the stalks just fall down, leaving the husks amongst the leaves, to be easily picked up and thrown in sacks by hand. I know I say this is easy, which again, it is relatively easy, relatively speaking, compared to rice or vegetables. Rice requires more monitoring, a more constant and stable water supply, and more delicate harvesting labor. Rice is also more at risk from parasites and pests, while vegetables are extremely tricky to grow en masse. Again, due to pests and any fluctuating climate contingencies. Say too much sun, or too much rain, or too little of both. Corn isn't like that. Corn is tough, hardy. It's much better at taking care of itself. Unlike fruit and vegetables, once harvested, corn can be dried and stored for lengthy periods of time. It can be easily weighed and checked for quality en masse. The harvested kernels stack up tightly, meaning it can also be easily shipped, requiring no refrigeration. The dried kernels are highly versatile. They can be rehydrated as food for humans. They can be milled into flour. They can be turned into biofuels or starches. And most commonly, and most importantly for us, they can be turned into animal feed. In all these regards, corn is a wonder crop, particularly when you put it up against something as fickle and finicky as, say, tomatoes. The only problem for those of us in the hills is the massive amount of waste, the material product produced by the plant, the stems, the leaves, the husks. To plant the next year's crop, you have to clear the cornfields of that waste. For this, there are only 3 options. 1. Intense labor application. So that would be humans themselves clearing the land by hand with machetes, hoes, and canvas bags, and stuffing them with waste and transporting them down the mountain, possibly by hand as well even. 2. Advanced machinery like combine harvesters and tractors with plows to plow the waste material back into the soil. and free. Fire, burning the stubble. So let's break down the issues. Problem 1 with intense labour application. Well, that's quite an easy one to write off. It would take a literal army of strong, abled people to do such a job, and that labour capacity simply doesn't exist in the villages. Problem 2, the advanced machinery. Here in my notes, I've simply written low. So the most advanced machinery you'll find in those cornfields is probably a motorbike, maybe with a sidecar. And even those can't make it up many of the steep, narrow, dirty slopes most of the time. So a combine harvester or a tractor doing so is quite laughable. Problem 3, fire. Well, the only risk is that the fire gets out of control and spreads to the forest. And yep, that's what happens. Now, whether the regional blanket of smoke is caused by smoke from the corn or actually smoke from the consequential unintended forest fires is unknown. Maybe, a little bit of both. But nonetheless, due to the geography of the region, the high mountain ridges and the low valleys, the smoke has nowhere to go. During the dry season, the air is stagnant. There is no wind nor rain to speak of, nothing to disperse it until the rains begin again in late April. Anyway, so looking at this economically, there is only one solution to clearing the waste, and that's fire. And where there's fire, there's smoke. Okay, so let's say you're sticking with me for now. So the north is a corn latifundia. Okay, so why here? Why now? Why corn? And how did it come to be? Many of these answers can be found in our last series on counterinsurgency, where we looked at the parallel lines of agricultural development and counterinsurgency policy. In that series, we somewhat dropped the narrative at the turn of the millennium, and here it is where our corn conspiracy really begins. So I'll do a quick recap and we can pick it up again. So at the dawn of the modern era, I hate that word, let's say post-World War II, Thailand was basically a big rice bowl, and much of the rice land, the wet rice cultivation paddies, were incapable of expanding. Rice, like I said before, can be quite a delicate crop. You need to have a flat land with large amounts of irrigation, unless you're willing to put in the decades of labour that was able to construct those beautiful terraced fields you see famously in places like Sapa in Vietnam. So, the Thai agricultural economy had nowhere to go. The forest was thick, often mountainous, and the sole property of the monarchy. The paddy fields were owned by the elite landlords, and the international trading markets were not yet developed enough to ship a pineapple grown in Thailand to the supermarket shelves of Paris. It was during the social tensions of the supposed Cold War in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, while the Thai communist insurgency was active, that the state and capital worked hand in glove to facilitate clearances of forest land, to open up new spaces of cultivation, extraction, and simultaneously new markets. This was done so as to release the pressure valve of economic stagnation and social unrest in both urban and rural areas. They did this by the monarchy, or the state, giving away parcels of forested land for farmers to clear. This is what the last series was all about, and do go and give all 7 episodes a listen if you have a minute. But basically, if you were a landless peasant or a broke urban worker, and you were offered free land somewhere in the countryside, you would absolutely go and take it, rather than take the risk of joining an insurrection. Thailand was once, at the time, described as America's 51st state, a bulwark of anti-communism in the Southeast Asian Sea of Red. The Americans had poured massive manpower and resources into enforcing the Thai elite against its workers and peasantry, developing an intricate Gladio-esque network of anti-communist death squads, intelligence apparatuses, massive propaganda efforts, a powerful central state core in Bangkok, and facilitating the opening of the economy to the global markets. In the 1970s, a well-organized peasant movement emerged, the Farmers' Federation of Thailand. While the group was national, its heartlands were in the north. To quote Andrew Turton on the movement, writing in the Journal of Peasant Studies, he said, quote, "Some demanded for immediate action, such as grants of land for coming planting seasons, price regulation, reduction of farm debts, suspension of court cases involving farmers, release of those arrested for trespassing, and help for flood victims. Other demands were longer term, such as those for land reform and a permanent provision of land for the landless, and a solution to the problems of indebtedness and high interest rates. Some demands were more immediately political, such as the lifting of martial law." End of quote. This sudden upsurge in politicized peasant organizing struck fear into the land-owning class and their crony enforcers within the military. The peasantry had long been seen as a vulnerable target to communist subversion. It was during this organizing that the death squads were activated and an assassination campaign against the peasants began. Many of these death squads had been directly and indirectly formed by the US state, most notably by Bill Donovan, founding father of the CIA and post-World War II ambassador to Thailand. At the height of the assassination campaign, between March and August 1975, 21 Farmers' Federation leaders were killed, the majority of them in the north. It's unclear exactly how many assassinations can be attributed to the campaign overall, but the immediate effect was the decapitation of the Federation. This was concluded with the massacre at Thammasat University in 1976, with a death toll well into the hundreds. The message to peasants and anyone else politically organizing against the repressive state and the capitalist class was chillingly clear. Following the assassination campaign and the defeat of the Communist Party Thailand insurgency in 1983, the peasants effectively lost all bargaining power. They were to be left at the mercy of the landlord classes and the extractive markets. This, along with the simultaneous blossoming of the Green Revolution, the fertilizers and the farming technologies and the complex international trade networks, it facilitated farmers or landlords to make farmers plant new types of crops for market in the freshly cleared forest lands. Here I will again quote from perhaps my favorite political ecology paper of all time, Larry Lohmann's Land, Power and Forest Colonization in Thailand, published in 1993. This is something of my Thai political ecology Bible. So, to quote, "Patron-client networks, together with farmers' desires for advancement, agricultural extension, malaria eradication programs and other factors have articulated with the new export economy to induce more farmers into the forest. Since the 1960s, merchants, millers, traders in forest products, timber companies, speculators and strongmen have engaged and financed a large proportion of settlers who have cleared the forests in eastern, central, lower north and northeast regions, which are then planted with maize, sugarcane, cassava, rubber and eucalyptus. These new rural patrons have provided marketing, seeds and credit available at monthly interest rates of 5% or more to buy food or hire labor and tractors. Mainstream sources of credit for this are often not available." End of quote. So he's saying that these patronage networks were what facilitated the expansion of agricultural lands into the forest. These patrons are named as, to quote again, merchants, millers, traders in forest products, timber companies, speculators, and strongmen. So in short, the petty bourgeois intermediaries of the capitalist class and their cronies. Continuing to quote here, quote, production and legal and market hazards are in large part passed on to the individual growers, who have to turn over their output to agribusiness in exchange for costly inputs. As in other patronage-mediated systems, further clearances of land often follows, whether to clear debts or to provide more income in a cash economy. Such factors have been combined with land deprivation to draw ever more settlers into the forest. This deprivation can be ascribed to roughly 4 causes related to the patterns of economic development promoted by the Thai state and its international benefactors. The first is economic differentiation, the accumulation of land and other resources in the hands of a minority, and the migration of the deprived seeking new access to them. This pressure is then subject to a positive feedback from environmental degradation resulting from the cultivation of migrant-cleared upland forests, and from cultural change undermining previous protective attitudes towards local land and forest. Thirdly, outright seizure or enclosure of land by elites for economically productive purposes, such as logging or plantations, forces still more peasants into forest colonization. Finally, rising land prices and speculation make it difficult even for those smallholders who have kept control of their fields to resist pressures to sell and move on elsewhere. So that was a little speed run, but what we can see here is that latifundian pressure that I was talking about earlier. This pressure, which necessitates the mass expansion of agricultural land and pushing that expansion to the absolute limit, both geographically and through labor extraction. Lohmann describes how the pressure on peasants from creditors, buyers, and local elites forces them into clearing more and more forest for crop space, with ever-increasing debt forever chasing them. I think it's really important to highlight another point that he made earlier on there, where he said, quote, provide more income in a cash economy. And the best example I like to use for this is that as new technologies and products come to the market, some become essential, like, for example, Wi-Fi or a monthly phone bill, which costs around 600 to 1,000 baht per month. I think we can all agree that it is essential to have Wi-Fi or a phone nowadays. So that's something like an extra 12,000 baht per year per household, when a typical monthly income in those areas is about 12,000 baht. So that would be a 10% increase in cost per year that literally didn't exist before. Now, since that paper was published in 1993, I will have to take over the narrative from here. In 1997, the Tom Yum Goong market crash devastated the economy, resulting in a mass movement of people out of urban areas and back into their rural hometowns. In 2001, Thaksin Shinawat's Thai Rak Thai party was elected, in large part thanks to their base, the rural poor and the lower middle classes in the rural areas. Thai Rak Thai built a vast state welfare network, provided huge rural development policies, and alleviated the poverty of millions of the rural poor. There was an economic boom. People bought trucks, tractors, built new houses, opened new businesses, and so on and so forth. Just after 5 years after the election, however, there was, of course, a military coup against Thai Rak Thai, leading to over a decade of political instability and throwing the economy in and out of economic crises. All of those investments made by rural people totally bottomed out, throwing them into debt. And this is an extremely common family narrative, like, oh, my family were doing well in Thaksin time, they invested, and then the economy went to shit, and now we're in big debt. Generational debt nowadays. So even within our Dindang group of about 10 people, I think around half of the families fit this description. So the economic effects of these crises were, of course, felt most profoundly by the rural poor. Household debt skyrocketed from 40% of GDP at the time of the coup to 90% in 2021. Now remember what Larry Lohman said earlier, to requote it, quote, "Production and legal and market hazards are in large part passed on to individual growers who have to turn over their output to agribusiness in exchange for costly inputs. As in other patronage-mediated systems, further clearances of land often follows, whether to clear debts or to provide more income in the cash economy." So I think that first sentence was very important to highlight too. Production and legal and market hazards are in large part passed on to individual growers. This is the agribusiness practice of the big companies not actually owning the land that's being farmed. Indeed, they don't want to own the land. Rather, it's in their interest for the peasants to own the land, and hence bear any risks from the fluctuating markets that make land ownership and farming so risky, such as bad harvests. And even then, it's better, it's like, I didn't write this in the notes, I just remembered, it's better if you've got your workers in debt, you know, because then they have less bargaining power against you. So what we see in the first 2 decades of the 2000s is a massive increase in household debt, which pushes farmers into further land clearances and field creations. Okay, then let's stick that beside corn production. So between 2002 and 2022, corn planting for animal feed increased around 400%, while simultaneously household debt increased by 200%. To circle back then to how we started this section, the anti-communist policies of the Cold War of clearing land for intense agricultural use so as to ease the internal socio-political and economic pressures are directly responsible for starting and maintaining the policies forcing the peasants into growing corn and these agricultural practices that facilitated this toxic latifundia. Now, as I said before, it is a confluence of factors that facilitate the smoke. I kind of see it like a river, with different streams joining and increasing the water pressure along the way. So far, we've examined just a few of these streams. It takes just a confluence of 2 to make a river. Let's say so far we've looked at the corn crop and the land clearances, but there are more streams to uncover, streams which feed into this conspiracy. The land clearances of the Cold War, the opening up of the forested frontier for settlers, was absolutely a conspiracy at the time, one orchestrated by the state, capital, and the American empire. Again, in the last series, we went far deeper into the role of the American intelligence, state planners, and academic institutions in instituting these policies behind closed doors. The purpose of this was to ensure the continued extractionist imperial policies of the West towards what was then called the Third World. Thailand was, in a very literal sense, decommunized and primed to become the modern plantation, the latifundia that it is today. It was, without question, and by definition, a conspiracy. But that's just part 1 of the corn conspiracy. In the next episode, we're going to bust some myths, shoot down some flak. We're going to talk about the hall of mirrors one inevitably finds themselves wandering through when looking for a way out of the smoke. Slash and burn practices, hunting, urban snobbery, Laotian farmers, cross-border smoke, forest fires, and just how little money corn actually accounts for. More importantly though, we're going to talk about sugarcane. And I do encourage you to go and look into what supposedly causes this smoke, because almost every article and academic paper I can find says sugarcane, bar a few. And in the 10 years I've been in these hills, I've not seen a single plant. Look beyond the smoke and the sugarcane leaves, friends, and see the corn for what it is. And see you next time. April 14th, 2024. The right to breathe, severe air pollution, the unseen culprit, the nation Thailand. Reason given for the cause of smoke, sugarcane. March 6th, 2024. Thailand, 10 million sought treatment for pollution-related illnesses in 2023, BBC. Reason given for the cause of smog, sugarcane and rice burning. March 30th, 2023. Thailand's extreme air pollution, also BBC, blames sugarcane and rice burning. January 15th, 2024. Is Thailand's Clean Air Act enough to end pollution? DW Network. Reason given for cause of smog, sugarcane burning in northern Thailand and corn burning in Burma and Laos. March 8th, 2023. Chiang Mai to hand out face masks as dust from fires hits hazardous levels. The Guardian blames crop burning in general with no mention of corn. March 27th, 2023. Air pollution chokes Thailand as campaigners call for stricter laws. The Guardian again blames sugarcane this time. 20th of March 2024. Thailand mulls ban on corn imports from neighbours to tackle smog. Bloomberg blames corn burning in Burma and Laos, while blames sugarcane burning in Thailand. April 5th, 2023. Smoke from forest fires blankets northern Thailand in thick pollution. CNN blames forest fires and, quote, slash and burn farming. December 7th, 2023. Filtering through efforts for cleaner air, Bangkok Post solely blames sugarcane farming. April 6th, 2023. The connection between burning season in Thailand and poverty, the Borgen Project, blames slash and burn farming and sugarcane. Okay, so something is maybe a little odd here, no? All of these news outlets can't seem to get their stories straight. I swear to you all as well, I have not selectively curated these. These are the first news outlets that just came up in a Google search. There's another article here that I'm going to read from. While those other pieces are from major Western outlets, here's a regional one by a Thai reporter funded by a Scandinavian NGO. And this is the most in-depth article I could find on specifically sugarcane burning. Headline: Burning Dilemma. Sugarcane Farmers in Thailand's Green Vision in Southeast Asia Globe by Wanpen Pajai. Produced as part of the Stockholm Environment Institute Asia Media Grant for Environmental Reporting. To quote from it here then. A sugarcane field is burnt to wilt away the tops and leaves, leaving only the charred sugarcane stalk for ease of cutting and transportation to factories. But as the sugar production starts churning and the fields are burned from December to February each year, the air quality worsens significantly as northern Thailand enters its annual burning season. Okay, it frames the issue as sugarcane burning being responsible for the smoke in northern Thailand. Let's go on here. Gan, this is quoting again, Gan, a sugarcane harvester in northeast Thailand's Udon Thani province near the Laos border, is just one of many farmers that still uses this burning method during harvesting season. So it's a little odd, given that Udon Thani is not in the northern region. It's in the Isan, northeastern region. And this may seem an odd quibble, but if you know anything about Thailand and its geography, Isan, the northeast that is, and the north are completely different. They just have a kind of similar name. It's a bit confusing because the shape of the country is weird. They are completely distinct, both geographically and agriculturally. The northeast, Isan, that is, and Udon Thani in particular, are known for their endless flat horizons of agricultural land, while the north is defined by steep forested mountains. Udon Thani is around 500 kilometers away from the nearest northern province. That's 5 provinces away. Not to mention that annual smog does not affect the northeast provinces like Udon Thani, as it does the provinces in the actual north. I just checked, and in the past month, Udon Thani has 4 days where the ppm, the AQI, was over 150. Comparatively, in Chiang Rai, the past month, there have been 20 days over 150 and 5 days over 200. So here we're clearly talking apples and oranges. Udon Thani and the northeast and the north are not the same thing, and neither are the effects of the smoke there. I can see the confusion for foreigners reading this with north and northeast, but there is not a single Thai person who would consider Udon Thani to be part of the north, and evidently it's not part of the annual smog, other than in the confines of this article. So in short, this particular sugarcane field in Udon Thani is not in northern Thailand. In fact, if we search the rest of the article for the word north, it only comes up with northeastern. Strange, given that this article specifically identifies and frames the problem as northern Thailand's burning season at the outset. Actually, overall the article is quite good for understanding how sugarcane production works. It's just very bizarre that this initial framing is highly misleading. So, sugarcane. Honestly, while researching this, I started to feel extremely gaslighted because, as I said in the last episode, I've never once seen sugarcane growing in the north in all my years. But I keep being told over and over again by these respected outlets and environmental NGOs that sugarcane fires in the north cause the annual smoke. So first I asked friends who live around here. No, they've never seen sugarcane in the north. Then I asked farmers that I know, and no, they've never seen sugarcane in the north. And still, after reading all these articles, I still felt like maybe I was missing something. Each article confidently stating the presence and burning of sugarcane in the north. So I actually asked the Northern Peasants Federation of Thailand. I said, do you know anyone growing sugarcane in the north? They said, and I'll quote the exact message, Tang Nua bu khao pod jiao, mai mi oi. In the north, there are cornfields, no sugarcane. And here's a message from a farmer friend in Phang district in northern Chiang Mai. He said, quote, in Chiang Mai, we never grow sugarcane. Everyone knows the smoke is from corn burning, which also causes forest fires. So what's going on here? Well, like I said, it's a goddamn corn conspiracy. Hello again. The AQI right now where I am is at 150, which kind of sucks. So, of course, I'm inside, hiding from the smog, talking to you good people. So I was wondering, and when I was just like rereading that bit of the script I wrote, I was wondering, like, have you ever watched Law and Order SVU? So there's like this kind of classic type of episode where there'll be a sex crime and the detectives find the first suspect, who's like a real sleazy guy. He seems totally guilty, blah, blah, blah. And then on closer inspection, he's actually innocent of the initial crime. And they end up, however, charging him for some other unrelated offense before going on to get the real perpetrator. So when I was thinking about sugarcane and corn, it's exactly like that. Sugarcane is the first suspect, who is still totally guilty, but not of this particular crime of northern smoke. And look, I don't have any personal bias against corn and a love for sugarcane. If sugarcane was guilty, I'd be fine at calling it out. What do I care? But it just isn't true. Sugarcane farming is one of those kind of industries that's on like the naughty list of bad crops, like palm oil. It fucks up ecosystems. It's almost always harvested with hyper-exploited labor, and it's often burnt, causing smoke pollution. Actually, from what I can tell from my research, sugarcane does in fact, or maybe, emit more pollution than any other crop in Thailand. You see? Sugarcane. Dung, 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 guilty. But it's not grown in the north. And there is no evidence at all that the smoke from sugarcane migrates somehow to the north. In fact, if you look at the sugarcane growing regions, they actually have far better air quality than the north, particularly during smog season. To give an indication of where sugarcane is grown, the major sugarcane mills in Thailand are in Suphanburi, Singburi, Chayapum, Khon Kaen, Kalasin, Loi, and Amnat Charuan. All of these provinces are in either Isan or the central regions. The closest mill to the north, sugarcane mill to the north, is that one in Loi province. But obviously, any actual farmer or agricultural worker, or myself even, knows sugarcane is not grown in the north. Sugarcane burning is a very real problem, and throughout the year potentially accounts for more agricultural emissions than corn. But that burning is far more spread out, both geographically and spread out through the year, meaning the smoke doesn't have that ubiquitous blanketing effect that corn does in the north. The sugarcane industry in Thailand is run almost exclusively by Mitapon Group, which is the world's 5th largest sugarcane producer and the largest producer in Asia, including China. The head of the company, Isarat Vongkusulsunkit, I think, is ranked as the 24th richest man in Thailand. Sugarcane is big agribusiness, the kind we were talking about in the last episode. Mitapon, however, do not have any investments in corn, and we will get to who does a little later. For now though, let's just bask for a moment in the uneasiness and maybe a little smugness that the BBC, CNN, The Guardian, Bloomberg and Associates have got this completely fucking wrong. Since we've already started busting myths today, let's just knock out a quick one here, shall we? Another one, that is. So there were two more culprits in those articles on my hit list. And the first is rice field burning. I'd say about half of those articles blamed paddy burning alongside sugarcane. This one is a lot easier to dispel. Rice exports have always been the bedrock of the Thai agricultural economy. By looking at exports, we can get a clear sense of how much rice is grown and how much growing is increasing or decreasing. So this is from the Thai Rice Exporters Association. In 2002, Thailand exported 7 million metric tons of rice. In 2022, Thailand exported 7.6 million metric tons of rice. Well, that was easy, wasn't it? Rice production has remained almost stagnant in the past 2 decades. And we talked about this last episode, that there is no, or has been no movements really to expand paddy lands, as 1, there's not enough suitable land, and 2, the market is already saturated and at capacity. I will concede that farmers do burn rice fields. Everyone's seen it happen. But to the actual argument that rice paddy burning causes the annual smoke, well, the smoke is a phenomenon we've seen appear in the past 20 years. That would require some major change in rice production to account for this output. In short, nothing has changed with rice production in the past 20 years. So there's no way that rice burning can be the cause of this phenomenon that started and intensified in the past 20 years. Again, I said it in the last episode, but you know what has started and intensified in the past 20 years? Well, again, between 2002 and 2022, corn planting for animal feed increased from 620,000 rai to 2.4 million rai, an increase of around 400%. Next up, slash and burn, which was mentioned numerous times in those articles. This one is more of a pedantic issue I have, because what the writers think they are talking about when they say slash and burn is in fact not slash and burn. What they mean is burning the stubble. The reason I bring this up is because I'm quite a big fan of slash and burn farming, though of course not of that awful racist name they gave it. I went into this in the last series and I think I did quite a good job explaining it, so I'm just going to edit in what I said last time because it makes my life a lot easier. So cue it here. And to preface this, I think it's important to point out the practice of slash and burn is something of a grey spectrum. That is to say, some groups practice this method more intensely and in different formats to others, to the point that it became almost impossible to clearly distinguish what I'm even talking about at some points. So I will follow my Virgil guide for this series in Anne Usher and use the example she did, using the Daungjia method. I don't know how it's pronounced. I think it's a Karen word. Daungjia. I'm going to go for that. So, the so-called Daungjia method, practiced in eastern Burma and western Thailand, typically among the Karen people, involved rotational shifting cultivation, controlled burning of forests, and fallowing periods for fields. More specifically, this is a mixture of small-scale natural farming techniques, where fields are created by controlled fires in forested areas. The fire, rather than ruining the land, as colonialists always saw it, helped to fertilize the soil. Crops would then be planted and rotated over various seasons. So one season, let's say you plant corn, and another season beans, and so on. You rotate it. And after a few seasons, you fallow the field, meaning you just leave it alone without tilling the soil, so as to recover that organic matter. Another technique during this fallow period is to plant cover crops like clover to refill the nitrogen levels in the soil, which will increase the soil recovery rate compared to just leaving it alone. Furthermore, the surrounding forest acted as an essential source of food and materials via hunting and gathering. Anyway, that was easy. So in short, the Downja method, or Swidden cultivation or natural farming, or as the colonialists of the last century called it, slash and burn, and apparently still do call it, is actually pretty cool and pretty good. So I think what the writers in those articles that we saw at the beginning were referring to there is actually not slash and burn, but burning the stubble, or maybe they just completely conflate the two, I'm not sure. The reason I have such an issue about them using this kind of language, as I said before, is because using slash and burn as a term specifically targets indigenous shifting cultivators who, rather than destroying the environment and the forest, actually seem to have been the only ones who can ever live harmoniously with it in the past few centuries. So when these ignorant writers use the word slash and burn, those shifting cultivators catch strays. And God, I hate this kind of lazy, useless journalism. I think slash and burn, they just think, oh, they cut it and they burn it. And so that's what they kind of assume when they see burning crops. No. Anyway, sugarcane, busted. Rice, busted. Slash and burn, busted. And the next big one, cross-border smoke. Now, this is the most common argument to actually have some truth to it, cross-border smoke. It's also the one that you'll often find the most in Thai media, Thai language media. It goes something along the lines of saying that corn growing in Burma and Laos is what's responsible for smoke, which crosses into Thailand. Usually they can see that there is some corn growing in Thailand, but they wildly downplay the Thai role in the smoke and massively exaggerate that of Burma and Laos. I'll quote here from a piece called "The Tangled Problem of Sugarcane." God, we can't escape it. And this is from Think Global Health. Anyway, this article talks mostly about sugarcane, of course, in the same old misinformed framing way that all the others do. But then there is this section on corn titled "Cutting Corners in Corn." So I'll quote here. In maize production too, contract farmers frequently circumvent government bans on agricultural burning to meet production targets set by private agribusiness. This constitutes a form of slow violence as it jeopardizes the health of contract farmers while reinforcing unequal power relations to their long-term detriment as a short-term strategy to avoid indebtedness. That is absolutely true. Well done. Smallholder farmers with limited access to agricultural lands have also become increasingly indebted to large agribusiness since 2012 due to falling global commodity prices, combined with fluctuating yields and reduced government subsidies. Also true. Well done, you're doing so well. Consequently, they are under continual pressure to produce high-yielding crops to repay debts instead of investing in sustainable technologies and mechanized methods of clearing land that do not rely on the use of fire. Also true. At the transnational scale, Thailand's northern and northeastern provinces, in particular, suffer from the impacts of transboundary haze from agricultural burning in neighbouring countries. Especially the burning of maize. A Bangkok-based environmental science professor estimated that the majority of maize-burning hotspots are, quote, located outside of Thailand, about 70%. They are all in our neighbouring countries. Sus. Sus quote right there. We'll bust it later. Anyway, going on. All maize-producing countries in mainland Southeast Asia, including Thailand, have sought to accelerate national production in recent years to meet growing regional demand, especially from China, which uses maize to feed livestock for meat consumption. Thai agribusiness conglomerates that profit from this boom in maize exports have been protected from liability by successive Thai governments. For example, maize became the main cash crop in Myanmar due to industrial maize contract farming schemes promoted by Charoen Pokapan (CP), Thailand's largest private company, to supply China's chicken feed market. So we finally get 3 paragraphs on corn. And not bad paragraphs overall, I suppose. However, again, in the rest of the article, the framing is completely off and it throws away the point to the whole section. And again, this is a very small section from a much, much larger piece on sugarcane, which also fails to point out that there isn't sugarcane farming in the north. But anyway, at least they're aware of corn, right? However, this article, and according to one unnamed Bangkok-based professor, 70% of burning spots come from outside of Thailand. Poor old Thailand, just a victim of its ghastly neighbours yet again. Well, for starters, I followed up on the hyperlinks and the citations and I couldn't find out who that professor was, and we'll get into the susness of the academy a little later. But I find that 70% number wildly dubious. To bust this myth, I'm going to rely heavily on visual data, and I will put some links to the pictures in the descriptions to this episode. But absolutely yes, there is also maize growing and burning in neighbouring countries. But that 70% number does not stack up at all. And for this we need to talk about what that professor said: hotspots. So Greenpeace published a study last year in this topic where they looked at satellite imagery of cropped maize land in the region. This report, by the way, doesn't mention sugarcane, so good for them on that. And this is the only piece of decent reporting on maize I've actually come across. Their conclusion also squarely points a finger at northern Thailand, although it does highlight vast cropped corn lands and hotspots in the surrounding provinces. Not provinces, like other countries, border region. Now this term burning hotspots is an interesting one. We see it a lot in the Greenpeace report, and they describe hotspots as such, quote, in this study, satellite images using moderate resolution imaging spectroradiometers equipment from NASA's Terra and Aqua satellite and VIAS system satellite have detected hotspots, burn scars in maize farming areas located in the Mekong subregion, which also includes upper northern Thailand, Lao People's Democratic Republic, and the Shan states of Myanmar. The images reveal a correlation between the increase in industrial maize plantation and transboundary haze pollution, a grave threat to local communities. Unfortunately, they give us no further information on the methodology of how a hotspot is identified and defined, and this is what I have a problem with. So hotspots are the hot term in Thai media for blaming the smoke on Laos and Burma, like in that earlier quote, the 70% quote. Greenpeace had not as dramatic but similar findings wherein they identified the majority of hotspots coming from outside of Thailand as well. Now, when it comes to satellite analysis, I am obviously a bit less qualified and I find it a little harder to dispute, but I am nonetheless skeptical that there is a direct correlation between supposed hotspots as they identify it and smoke levels. For starters, let's actually look at the smoke levels in these high hotspot regions. Monitoring stations in Shan State in Burma, southern Yunnan around Jinghong in China, and in Laos around Luang Prabang all consistently register equal or lower parts per million smoke numbers than northern Thai stations throughout the smoke season, yet they have significantly more hotspots. You get it, right? Like the actual intensity of the smoke in the surrounding regions is far less than in Thailand, but supposedly they have far, far more hotspots. You can go and look for yourself on AQI Air. The air quality index is not significantly lower, but the fact that the number is lower is significant compared to the number of hotspots that surround it. You know what I mean? I'll post pics, okay? I'll do a little folder or something. Okay. So for example, right now, on the live hotspot map, northern Laos is absolutely covered in hotspots. I can barely even see Laos, while northern Thailand has very, very, very few. Yet at the time of writing, Chiang Mai and Lampang and Chiang Rai in Thailand have higher AQI readings, so more smoke, than Luang Prabang, which is surrounded by hotspots. And generally throughout the season, Chiang Mai, for example, and Luang Prabang keep an equal pace with one another in terms of actual smoke intensity, despite Luang Prabang being surrounded by these supposed hotspots. In fact, looking at the live hotspot map, they actually look like they're confined by the Laos border. What it looks like is that there is not really a clear correlation between hotspot levels and smoke levels on a localized level. And again, this data would have us believe that the smoke is somehow sucked into northern Thailand. And hey, maybe there is a weather phenomenon where that's possible, but if there isn't a single mention of it anywhere. Remember what I said on the last episode? Where there's fire, there's smoke. Well, there doesn't seem to be all that much smoke coming from these supposed fires. In short, I think there's an error in correlating or perhaps identifying hotspots and smoke on the part of the satellite scientists. I mean, there clearly is, right? Because it says, oh, there's all these hotspots, there's all these fires here, but the smoke levels are very low. Whereas where there's no hotspots, the smoke levels are very high. Something's wrong. Like, it's not just me being shitty at science, right? And I have a few theories. And one is that these hotspots are often described as, quote, potential burning sites, which is interesting. So I guess that means, like, it's where the conditions are right for burning, but it doesn't necessarily mean they do burn, maybe. And I've also seen hotspots simply listed as fires. So fires that you can detect from a satellite in space, right? And if this is the case, I have another theory, which is that slash and burn farming, and what I really mean here is Swidden agriculture, the good kind. And so Swidden is definitely practiced to a higher degree in those areas of Laos and Burma in Shan State. Is practiced much more highly there than in Thailand. So what the satellites could be observing are numerous well-controlled Swidden fires, which, as we discussed before, are pretty much harmless and actually beneficial for forest life when practiced correctly. This then could account for the lack of intense smog pollution on these localized regions, where hotspot numbers are very high, but smoke levels are relatively moderate. While we're here, and we're talking about intensity of farming in these different regions, it's important to look at the amount of land and labour dedicated to farming in the three regions. Accurate information on farmed land in this cross-border area is hard to find. However, we can make some assessments based on the population sizes of these rural areas. In the northern Thai region, where corn is grown, and here I'm including the provinces of Kangpang Phet, Phetchabun, Loi and Tak, so the extended northern region, the population is around 9.3 million. The neighbouring corn-growing regions of Burma, so Shan State, Kayin State and some of Kachin, have a population of just around 3 million, though much of that farmed land is really quite far away from the Thai border. In the same regions of Laos, there's around 1 million in the border provinces, and in China, only around 1.5 million, as the highland becomes exceedingly non-arable further north of Sipsong Panha, or Sichuan Panha, or however it's pronounced. So, just in terms of labour power, the population of northern Thailand is around double than all the other regions combined. The huge drop-off in population density suggests they don't have anywhere near the necessary labour force to carry out as large of an agricultural operation as they do in Thailand. These other three regions are also far less agriculturally developed, and as I keep saying, the smoke only significantly developed in this region around 20 years ago, which was, as we saw in the last episode, the outcome of a complex confluence of economic and political contexts almost unique to Thailand. Furthermore, corn exports in this surrounding region actually almost solely go into Thailand. And so according to the same report from Greenpeace, quote, Thailand's food manufacturing and livestock market consists of big businesses led by Charoen Popcan Group, CP, that is, Bettergrow, Saha Farm, Cargill and Thai Food Group, and Lemthong Pochana. All of the listed businesses contribute to the connected supply chains in agricultural fields, from plant production to food processing. Consequentially, these business groups wield power over the economy, just as a government has power over maize pricing. Aside from dominating the market share, all of these companies mentioned own a combined 90% of chicken meat production. It is almost certain that almost all of the chicken, meat and eggs available in the Thai market comes from this industry, unless the consumer directly purchases it from independent small farmers. A major portion of the market belongs to Charoen Popcan Group, CP. Even though they hold only 30% of the domestic market, the CP Group is the largest feed manufacturer in the world, according to a report by Market Research. Around 42% of the company's revenue in 2017 was generated from animal feed sales. Going on here, stricter maize purchasing policy is one of the factors influencing big business to invest in neighbouring countries to compensate for the loss of production in Thailand. The expansion of production areas to neighbouring countries is another tactic used by the livestock industry to meet the demand for meat and animal feed in the global market. A report by Oxfam reveals information regarding the CP Group and its investments in the Shan state of Myanmar under the name Myanmar CP Livestock Company Limited. In 2012, the company invested in maize and rice production, including maize processing, costing around $550 million US. Around 80% of the production rate goes to exporting. That's back to Thailand. So, I hope you got that right. Basically, all of the maize coming from across the border goes, or 80% apparently goes into Thailand for Thai companies. So in short, there is cross-border maize burning as an issue. But definitely not that 70% number, surely not that 70% number that anonymous Bangkok professor claimed. Regardless, the corn growing that takes place over the border goes back into Thailand anyway and is owned by a Thai big agribusiness. So why do I even bother pointing this out? Well, a pervasive attitude in Thailand is to blame the smoke on Burma. And that's it, or Laos maybe. They just say, it's Burma's fault, not Thailand's. And this is a very common attitude. So what I'm saying is, judging by measuring data from air quality stations, labour capacity and satellite analysis, the burning area in the Burma, Laos, China regions is largely geographically dispersed compared to northern Thailand. As such, the blanket of smoke itself is less intense in those regions. As such, I don't see how smoke from the three surrounding regions would again migrate to the north of Thailand. What this cross-border argument does even when based on decent reporting like Greenpeace's. What it does is, when improperly framed, not enough context is given, is it abdicates the responsibility of Thailand for its own role in the pollution. A role which is the largest contributor out of all of the parties involved. Actually, there's another paper that I can't find right now, and it looked at how sentiment to cross-border pollution is affected in different countries. So pollution from neighbouring countries going over the border, and it's broadly considered more egregious than domestic pollution, by the population, that is. And so the other point I'm making is that while there is corn burning going on in the surrounding region, it is still the responsibility of one particular Thai agribusiness company, and that's CP. Now, since we have arrived at CP, I should point out that they are a highly litigious company, and Thailand has some very strict anti-defamation laws. So we have to be a little careful about what we say here. So earlier I alluded to issues in the academy with reporting on smoke pollution. This is, in my opinion, and from what I can see from my research, the reason why so many journalists blame the non-existent sugarcane plantations and their burning. In short, they read sketchy reports and regurgitate them without ever talking to any local farmers. I think the real cause, or maybe not even visiting the region, to be honest, or not getting out of Chiang Mai City, where they have their nice 4- and 5-star hotels and craft beer shops. I think the real cause for this is that journalists would rather trust supposedly qualified academic reports than the word of farmers. The point is, something is telling these journalists that sugarcane and rice are to blame. Anyway, on a completely unrelated note, when I last went to Chiang Mai University's agricultural fair, there were all these tents, all these different farmers groups, different industries. Like there's a tent with sunflowers, maybe one with orchids, and all of them are pretty small, just like these kind of like marquees, you know, with just a few people under them showing off their products. And then there's a behemoth, the CP tent, 4 walls, air conditioning, TVs, a stage, and catering. It's wild. Anyway, whatever, that's just a funny, unrelated story about Chiang Mai University and their relationship with CP. And on another completely unrelated note, try Googling, in Thai language, CP and the major agricultural universities in Thailand, like Kasetsart and Mejo, etc. You'll find yourself inundated with scholarship opportunities, paid partnerships, research grants, and so on. This isn't just CP, but all of the major agribusinesses operating here. Anyway, that's just another unrelated little note that might be interested to those of you who may want to contextualize the relationship between agribusiness and the academic institutions that those journalists rely on for their research. Talk to farmers, people, please, talk to farmers. I can put you in touch. Just message. Anyway, I think the really weird thing here, which I've struggled to get my head around, is why the sugarcane industry puts up with this kind of slander. I mean, they're a huge evil agribusiness as well, and they're taking the blame for something which totally isn't their fault. And I have a little theory on that, of course. I think that the flack thrown at the sugarcane industry in the north of Thailand that doesn't exist is simply straw manning, and that is to say a creation of a kind of enemy that doesn't even exist, to distract from those really responsible. This way, the state, or the media, or whatever, can be punitive and take action against the sugarcane industry in the north as much as they like. But it doesn't affect anyone's bottom line, because, as I keep saying, there isn't a sugarcane industry here. It's just a theory, I don't really know. And while researching this, I've been talking to a friend who's a Cambridge economist, and he said something interesting, which was that often seismic events are happening just below us in the economy, and we can't see them. And that made me think of the last series, about the land clearances and the counterinsurgency policies that were taking place behind closed doors. During that time, people weren't able to see it for what it was. You can't see the forest through the trees, kind of thing. But with the benefit of hindsight, it's clear to see that conspiracy of the past few decades. And I think the corn conspiracy is perhaps something very similar. At this point, I believe that this conspiracy is very much automated. I talked about this in the last series too, and it can be hard to articulate sometimes. But I don't believe that there are necessarily elites sitting behind closed doors plotting this whole thing out. Rather, let's say, for example, somebody gets a university scholarship from a big agribusiness firm. They then go on to work at that firm, while plenty of their friends and classmates stay in the research department of the university. Their big agribusiness firm will also, fund the university further, fund their research projects, and fund scholarships and what have you. And then when the university is researching pollution caused by corn, they perhaps just lean on their old friends to dim the report down a little, to make sure to blame cross-border smoke, or sugarcane, or slash and burn, and so on. And then finally, these lazy, ignorant journalists just read the report uncritically and propagate these inaccuracies further, which turns into a feedback loop. I don't think at any point that anyone has necessarily thought or said, we need to blame sugarcane over corn. Rather, it's a system weighed so heavily towards extractionist, latifundian market economics that the process of creating and maintaining this conspiracy is essentially automated. So I know I said this would be a two-parter, but there's more we need to cover. A few more myths to knock down, and I actually want to talk about farmers and the future. So I'm going to do another episode, and then we'll call it a day. So as I said, next time we'll cover some more bases. Hunting, forest fires, and we'll look at the lives of farmers and talk about what is to be done. And potentially, what is already being done. Rao rak per Thai. Thanks. Many years ago, I was living on the outskirts of Chiang Mai City at the foot of Mount Doi Suthep. Actually, I was on the last road before the forest. And one evening, I was hanging out at a friend's workplace, and we got a text saying that the mountain was on fire. We went up to the roof, and we instantly saw the ominous red sky above the mountain. We rushed home to grab some essentials and evacuate. On the motorbike drive there, the smell of smoke was thick. Ash was falling down, and as we drew closer, we could feel the heat from the flames. We grabbed passports, laptops, essentials, and stashed it at a friend's place. From there, we went to the exhibition centre on the northern end of the canal road. There, a crowd had gathered to watch the forest fire spread down the mountain. We just sat and watched it there. These long red streaks cut out of the night, glaring at us from the familiar hill. The hill that is the ever-present backdrop of life for all in the city. We slept at a friend's that night. Coming back the next morning, the fire was extinguished. Fortunately, it hadn't reached our place, though the surroundings were covered in ash. I've since moved out of the city. I'm no longer in view of that mountain, but last night the same thing happened again. It erupted into flames as the city watched on. In the last episode of this mini-series, we're going to talk about forest fires. We're also going to talk about hunting, what life is actually like for corn farmers, and what is to be done about it all. Hey, welcome back. The air is still hanging at around 150 ppm here, vastly exceeding safe levels. Last night I was looking through some pictures on my phone from rainy season of last year, and I spent a lot of time in the forest last year, and the pictures are filled with verdant green mossy grounds, close-ups of fungi and insects. I felt the cool of the forest to return, but it's 44 degrees outside today and the air is a toxic hell, so the wait continues. It's really quite bleak, no? And also quickly before we get into it, really, I just want to mention, I was talking to a farmer friend from Lamphun yesterday about all of this, and she said, don't 100% blame corn, although it pretty much is all there to blame. But there are other crops like pineapple in Chiang Rai, which is burnt, not to the same degree. And yeah, she also said, we do burn other waste, though not the whole field. So, for example, longan, which is big in Lamphun, they'll burn the waste from the longan trees, but they won't burn, the orchard, obviously. So yeah. Just throwing that out there for her. Anyway, there is, in the forest right now around here, still the danger of forest fires, as I mentioned in the intro. I haven't really mentioned forest fires that much, but it is a significant factor in the annual smoke. There are two serious causes for forest fires. One is a fire from cornfields escaping into the surrounding forest, something which no doubt happens en masse. The other cause, and more commonly found to take the blame in Thai language media, that is hunting. And I'm covering my bases here by talking about hunting. So I'm quite sure that hunting was the cause of those two aforementioned forest fires on Doi Suthep. There are no cornfields to speak of, but there are poor villages, where one typical hunting technique is for a group of hunters to split into two, and one makes a line of fire which scares animals into fleeing downwind in a certain direction where they can be predated by the other group of hunters. And dry season 2 is a particularly good time to practice this, as most of the foliage from the jungle has fallen away, allowing for greater lines of sight and an easier hunt. Now, normally I will refuse to blame poor villagers, but this practice is really quite not okay. I understand that in some cases this is used to capture rare species for the wildlife or the illegal rare game market, in which case, yes, we can happily blame the buyers and fuck them. But honestly speaking, and I know this from living here, it is sometimes just a case that people go hunting like this because they like to go hunting. And that I personally can't abide by. Now, how much of the smoke actually comes from forest fires, however, is again relatively negligible compared to corn. We have to remember trends and the time in which the smoke emerged. Again, the smoke started 20 years ago. And again, over that 20 years, corn planting increased by 400%. I do not think hunting increased by 400%. And when I say I can't abide by it, it's not just me. Last week, a group of villagers in Sampatong went to the forest with monks and holy relics. There, they sat by an ancient old tree and laid a curse for any hunters who burnt the forest to be forever damned. So fuck the hunters, yes indeed, but we need to keep our eyes on the real enemy here, friends. And that is the masters of the corn and their grand conspiracy. These hills that surround me now, when you can see them, they are astonishingly beautiful. I remember when I first started to spend time in some of the rural villages in Lamphun. It's straight out of a Ghibli film. These dinky little wooden houses with friendly grandmas napping under them, glimmering paddies with lazy buffalo roaming around, kids fishing on tiny bridges over bubbling streams. Sometimes it is unbelievably idyllic. And oftentimes, it can be hard to reconcile places like this with the poverty that surrounds them. This idyllic setting can allow a revisionist idealism space to enter in. Yes, the people are poor, but look how beautiful it is. Look how happy they seem. This is dangerous thinking, friends. There are many pernicious elements about life in the rural north. Above all, however, is that of debt. We talked about this in the first episode of the series, but familial debt is really the driver of this latifundia. It's a mechanism that turns farmers into serfs, tethered to the land, like in the time of the Sakti Na feudal era. In Ghosts of the Red Soil, I wrote, following the coup against Thaksin, there was an economic vacuum, as his policies were rolled back. A recession set in, though it was predominantly felt in the semi-periphery areas that his coalition had invested in so heavily. The small-time debts of families ballooned when they were unable to make repayments. Many had no choice other than to turn to semi-illegal loan sharks. What was once a debt of around 50,000 baht in 2006 is now in the hundreds of thousands. A noose tied around the necks of the working class, though they can't pull away the stool, as the debt will be passed on to the next generation. Many of the decaying homes that were built on credit during Thaksin's golden era are now far less valuable than the debt that they've incurred. 21st century indentured servitude in full effect. Household debt skyrocketed from 40% of GDP at the time of the coup to 90% in 2021. For most families, the responsibility falls on the next generation. There's no chance that parents who took out the loans could raise the capital to pay it back. The children of the Thaksin era now reach the age where they can sell their labor and inherit the noose. It is debt that forces more forest to be cleared, more corn to be planted, and more waste to be burned. As I said, it's the engine behind the latifundia and the propellant behind the smoke. Again, Sarapi district in Chiang Mai has the highest rate of lung cancer in the country. The smog issue is not just an issue of toxic smoke for everyone who lives in the north. It's an explicitly class-based issue, which becomes all the more pernicious the further down the ladder you descend. So, now I'm going to have to talk about what's happened in the past year since the election, and maybe swing to more of an optimistic note, actually. And I'm so sorry to those middle-class listeners with master's degrees who are still sticking with me, but I need to talk about Pheu Thai. Because this year, 2024, was supposed to be the worst year on record. Sorry about these loud birds. You hear them? So rude. Anyway, 2024 was supposed to be the worst year on record. For starters, it's an El Niño year, with an unbelievable heat wave. Like I said, or I was saying earlier, it's 44 degrees today, and when you look at the weather app, it will be for the indefinite future, and I think it has been for Jesus, I'm just trying to think now, I could check, but at least 3 weeks, maybe a month now. And also we've had very, very little rain over the past winter, which further dries out the farmland. We were all geared up for the worst smoke ever, and it didn't come. Now don't get me wrong, it's still bad, but it's nowhere near as bad as we thought it would be, and it's far better than last year even. Let's just take a quick look at the data. So in 2023, Chiang Rai had 20 days where the ppm was over 200. 20 days. This year, there have only been 2. At the beginning of the season in February of 2023, Chiang Rai had 8 days where the ppm was over 150. This year there were none. Again, this was supposed to be the worst year on record, but actually it's been an improvement. Last year, I wrote an article called "To Stop the Smog Pollution, Empower the Farmers." I've repeated sections from that article in the past 2 seasons, so I'm not going to do it again. But much of the basic data and reporting from that piece has been reflected in this series. Now, in that piece, while examining what we've examined so far, there was also a prescriptive aspect to it. And essentially, I argued that basically the farmers need more bargaining power to basically not grow corn anymore. Because corn, typically for most farmers, is a very small percentage of their actual income. So, for example, I use the example of one farmer who only made about 3,000 baht a year from corn. She just had one small field, but that was enough to pay her Wi-Fi bill, right? So what I argued is if you give poor people, poor rural people, other forms of income, other protections financially, basically they have far more bargaining power, and also they don't have the need to grow corn. So this time last year, Pheu Thai, Thaksin Shinawat's old party, was re-elected into government. Now, I have a lot of critiques of the new generation of Pheu Thai, but historically, they have been able to work some absolute economic magic for the rural poor, as we saw under Thaksin's tenure. The question of whether they still have that capacity is not yet answered, but let me just quote a few little articles for you here. So, Bangkok Post, November 2024. The government, that's the new government, has managed to bring down the total number of informal debts by 670 million baht in just 2 months, solving 102,000 out of 140,000 debt cases reported to authorities as part of the push to reduce household debt burdens. According to Prime Minister Sethar, who is also the finance minister, the progress is a result of extensive cooperation by all agencies tasked with solving the nation's debt problems, including the Interior, Finance, Justice, Education, and Agricultural and Cooperatives ministries, along with several government-linked financial institutions. He said 102,000 of more than 140,000 appeals for help received by the government since the initiative was launched in November 28th of last year, have been successfully resolved, bringing down the total amount of debt being handled by the government initiative by 670 million baht. As of December 1st, the initiative was handling about 9.8 million baht in debt, which Mr. Sethar pledged to clear up before his time as PM ends. So that's quite interesting, no? That debt tackling. Anyway, going on. Also not mentioned in that article, Sethar has also repeatedly tried to cut interest rates, and the Bank of Thailand has fought back against it. So just for those who may not know, interest rates are how much kind of the interest there is on debt. So if the interest rate is, let's say, 10% annually, that's how much your debt is going up annually. So if it's cut to, say, 5%, your debt is increasing at a far slower rate. So they're trying to cut interest rates, right? Anyway, a couple more headlines that I won't read too much from. Bangkok Post, 1st of November 2023. More than 9,000 rai of army-owned land will be redistributed as a New Year's gift to landless farmers. Time Magazine, 11th of April 2024. Everything to know about Thailand's 14 billion digital wallet cash handout program. The program, which gives 10,000 baht to each 50 million Thais via a digital wallet in the fourth quarter, was finalized by a committee led by Sethar this week. Well, that will pay for the Wi-Fi, I'm sure. So those are the economic policies. And how about the on-the-ground schemes? Well, here's a few more headlines that I've had to, or actually it's just one that I've translated from Thai language media, because English language is totally lacking. Much of these policies, the on-the-ground policies, revolve around the governor of Chiang Mai province, Nirat Pongsittawatwong, I think his name is. And the programs have been led by him from mid-2023 and going into 2024. And these policies have been laid out for this year as like a trial program, which will then be extended to the rest of the northern region. He's a Pheu Thai governor, by the way. So this is from Thai PBS Policy Watch, a piece called Get to Know the Chiang Mai Model, a complete solution to the smog problem. So, quote, "The central focus of the Chiang Mai model is that it allows various sectors in the area to participate in tackling issues autonomously, rather than waiting for the central government or outsiders to give orders to the area. It has set up a war room to monitor the situation reflexively from the bottom up. The concept of tackling fires has been changed from the previous zero burning policy to one focused on fire management." This is really important, and I should have mentioned this earlier. So I think ever since I've lived here, the basically the only government response has been, we will fine you if you do burning, or we'll jail you. Or I remember there were people talking about taking away farmers' lands, which is ironic because oftentimes they don't even own them, or they're in debt because of them. So basically it's only been punitive so far, and that was under the military government. And that was a zero burning policy, is what it was known as. And so here, the concept of tackling fires has been changed from the previous zero burning policy to one focused on fire management. You can see how like punitive and disgusting that is, right? Because as we've kind of made very clear throughout this series, it really isn't the farmer's fault, as we said before, right? It's agribusiness holding the hand of the farmers, forcing them to light it, right? Anyway, so this fire management policy is part of a quota system which seeks to react to burning rates in different areas, permitting burning in certain places at certain times when appropriate. Clearing the stubble, the crop waste, will also be tackled without fire by financing machinery and the cost of gasoline for that machinery, as well as establishing groups and committees for transporting the waste, as well as factories to process it and forest land working groups. And actually, there were some very impressive pictures from earlier on this year where you could see these committees in action, like quite literally an army of people going up into the fields and clearing the land manually. And I don't know if you remember, but in the last episode, I said that there are two possible ways to clear a field. One is with fire, and the other would require an army. Well, in some places at least, this year, they got an army. All of the governing agencies involved in this have also stressed that these policies are aimed at solving the problem only in the short term, while long term it will require a far deeper response. And like I said, I don't know if Pheu Thai still have the magic economic touch that they did in the Thaksin era. They've only been in power for around 9 months so far and have inherited a disastrous state of affairs. But again, as I said, in 2023, Chiang Rai had 20 days where the ppm was over 200. And this year there have only been 2. And this year it was supposed to be much, much worse. I don't know. We got to look. I mean, look, this new Pheu Thai government, they are far from perfect. And they are also probably the worst form of Pheu Thai that it could have been, all things considered. And it's certainly a long, long way from socialism or whatever. But like with sugarcane, like with rice, and like with corn, we have to look at these trends, the evidence, the numbers. We have to talk to farmers. And then we have to call it like we see it. So, even though this year has been a lot better, I don't want to end on too much of a positive note. The air outside my window is still grey. It's 40 degrees with supposedly clear skies. I just went to the market and I could barely see the sun. It is bleak. So, let's wrap up this series in a neat little package, shall we? At the end of World War II, Thailand was a rice basket and the bulkhead for Western imperialist anti-communism in Asia. The imperial powers developed the state's bourgeois class and exterminated any revolutionary movements within its peasant and worker population. They opened up the country's forest for settlers, pushing them into clearing the woodlands to produce more and more agricultural surplus for the market. Once any hope of revolution had been snuffed out by the 1980s, the bourgeois class ensnared them in yet more debt, forcing yet more clearances. The uplifting policies of the reformer Thaksin Shinawatra were kiboshed by military coup and murder in the streets, pushing peasants even deeper into debt, forcing them into a hyper-exploitative neo-serf-like relationship with the new mass agribusiness housed in Bangkok, creating a latifundia in the periphery of the state. There, in that latifundia, the wonder crop corn flourished. Easily sown, grown and harvested, corn production expanded 400% following the ousting of Thaksin and the imprisonment of the poor under debted bondage on their own lands. The mass agribusiness held the hands of the peasants as they set the waste product in the field aflame year after year, billowing smoke into the hills where it was trapped by the high mountain ridges, poisoning those very same peasants until the rainy season could relieve their suffering. To cover their tracks, the agribusinesses and the academy propagated a straw man myth of sugarcane being to blame, despite nary a blade of the stuff growing in the hills. And so here we are. The sky is grey. The fires will likely come again next year. I'll be here as ever, stewing away inside, dreaming of the rich, verdant July forests. And I know this episode isn't quite as long as the others, and I'm finishing up here. But I will close it on a song about, life in the hills from Chiang Mai's most celebrated folk artist. Sorry if you don't understand the Khmer Mueang language, but I promise you it's very nice. All about the hills. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you. Bye bye.
บ้านข้าอยู่บนดอยเมฆหมอกลอยเต็มฟ้าอยู่กลางพงพนาตามภาษาคนดอยข้าบ่รวยบ่จนบ่เป็นคนสำอ้อยเกิดเป็นคนบนดอยบ่ต้องคอยง้อใครบ้านสู่อยู่ในเมืองมุงกระเบื้องสีใสบ้านข้าอยู่กลางไพรด้วยใบตองตึงสู่ซอกเพลงฝรั่งข้าชอบฟังเสียงซึ้งเอาตึงตึงตะติดตึงคดีซึ้งก้องป่าบ้านคนดอยบ่มีแสงสีบ่มีทีวีบ่มีน้ำประปาบ่มีโฮงหนังโฮงนวดคลับบาร์บ่มีโคลาแฟนตาเป๊ปซี่บ่มีเนื้อสันพัดน้ำมันหอยคนบนดอยชอบกินข้าวจีบ บ่มีน้ำหอมน้ำปรุงอย่างดีแต่หมู่เฮามีน้ำใจถ้าสู่อยากกินข้าวสู่ต้องไปไทยนาถ้าสู่อยากกินปลาก็ต้องไปหาในห้วยถ้าสู่ปลูกดอกฝ้ายสู่ได้ใส่เสื้อสวยแต่ถ้าสู่อยากถูกหวยก็เสียใจด้วยคนบ้านบนดอยบ่มีแสงสีบ่มีทีวีบ่มีน้ำประปาบ่มีโฮงหนังโฮงนวดคลับบาร์บ่มีโคลาแฟนตาเป๊ปซี่บ่มีเนื้อสันพัดน้ำมันหอยคนบนดอยชอบกินข้าวจีบ่มีน้ำหอมน้ำปรุงอย่างดีแต่หมู่เฮามีน้ำใจ